So available now on Marantz and Denon Pre-Pros receivers, we have Dirac ART, which I personally don't have any experience with myself. However, updates prices are like 350. Well, that's for the standard. How much is art? It's 299.
299, yeah.
It's not
So
bad.
for the update, not bad. If you don't have it at all, the whole package is 799, which I'm sure Erik has had some experience with. Erik, have you used it and what is it like?
Yeah, I have actually used it a couple times, and so it's actually very cool. So it's pretty similar to. This is a very drastic simplification, but think of noise canceling, and that perception is subwoofer sends out information. We've got different positions in the room. They're all different phases. They're all different amplitudes. And what you're doing is just changing the arrival time uh, and helping other subwoofers supplement that. So it works quite well.
Mm,
Um, I think it's one of those kind of things that is a big improvement, and we've had some great experiences with it. I think you do have to have some intelligence about the settings. You can be, and I know it's actually evolved and gotten a lot better as from the first couple of times that we used it as well. We did it a couple of shows and demos, um, and it works much better within specific limits, not going too high in frequency. It works, up to 150, maybe even 200 hertz. But just because it works doesn't mean it sounds great
yeah.
at those settings. And what I found a long time ago is if you set it too high, one, you're now sharing the load between maybe your mains and even surrounds. And then you start localizing sounds that shouldn't be in speakers in different positions of the room.
Hmm.
And you can actually degrade. You may have great performance and great flat frequency response throughout the room, but you doesn't necessarily mean it sounds good. And so that's kind of with the caveats of that. It
Yeah.
works great. It really does what it says it can do. So yeah, it's a pretty cool technology. You just have to be careful in settings.
When you
How do you think it stands up to a waveform?
It's very very different from my perspective. It's been a long time since I've A B'd them or been where you've done one versus the other. The disadvantage of waveforming is more woofers.
Yeah.
The advantage is that you truly remove the room. You basically take a standing wave in a room and you make it a traveling wave. So you take out all the interactions with the room itself. And theoretically it's perfect, but obviously it's never perfect. That absorption, the front wave emits a wavefront. The back room subwoofers absorb that energy, so it's not reflected back. If it's not reflected back, you can't have a standing wave. So the aspects of now you put stuff in a room and risers and all that. It's never absolutely perfect, but from that aspect, it works pretty good. The negative is you got double the amount of subwoofers.
Yeah.
So from a cost perspective, it can be kind of tough. But now there's cylindrical waveforming. There's some other solutions that they're coming up with that are, again, a little bit of a sacrifice. But generally, it takes the you can't take the ceiling mode out then. So halfway through the height of the room
Mm,
would be a no. Depending on the height of where you're sitting, though, generally you're not sitting at that. Your head isn't quite at that position,
yeah.
but it would be the main mode of one single null instead of 8 or 10 nulls throughout the bandwidth that you generally deal with when we deal with room modes. So.
Do you think if they have a system where they have waveforming plus they add in your capable speakers, kind of like art, into the mix, that would rectify that?
Oh, theoretically, probably. Gets kind of crazy because then you're going to start fighting what you're doing with the waveforming. So
Yeah, true.
those two technologies are actually going to start combating each other. You have a traveling wave that is now being affected by other speakers in a room from multiple positions. There's probably a logical or intelligent way to do it. Someone way smarter than me in signal processing, depending on what you might do and at what frequencies and where you stop being a traveling wave and which frequencies you start to uh, use an art technique.
Right.
So when you say art, like if it's not calibrated correctly, your settings aren't correct, you can start to localize. Is it just the lower frequencies that you localize, or is it actual like stuff in the mix of content?
Yeah, it's in the upper bands. So when you start saying you're sending signal from, let's say, 100 hertz or 150 hertz or something like that, and you start saying, well, I want to cancel that signal from another surround or another main to help make sure that they sum perfectly at the listening position, and not you're not hearing a node, uh, anti-node, then you're starting to now have a signal that was in your right speaker is now coming from the left speaker. And that's not where it should be. It's not where it should be coming from as a technique of object-oriented recording, right? Where is it at spatially in space? Um, that was quite a few years ago last time that I had used it in a demo, so there may be some more improvements in signal processing that they've done since then. And then there's also probably that I'm pretty sure they've kind of set the limit or found the sweet spot when you talk to Storm Audio or someone else from Dirac of where they want those settings to be to get those, the best settings, the best performance, right? So,
So is your preferred calibration technique, would it be art or waveform?
uh, actually, I don't know. I have used them, I think, in a smaller room, more cost effective scenario.
Mhm.
Art is a great performance. Um, you know, that's really a really cool, affordable way to get great bass throughout the space. Um, I don't really have a strong preference for either one. We use waveforming quite often from some recent shows because they were one of our most recent partners. So I've got the most recent experience with them and a few demo rooms. But both are great performances. I've never used it well, actually, I have. At MWave, we used it in a really large room. And it worked really well in that perspective. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to try it out very
Have
soon.
you had the chance to do kind of an A/B or in your room do both?
I haven't. I haven't. I think up till now, only Storm had the exclusive on it.
Yeah. Yeah, right.
Yeah, so I might have to get like an AV10 or something in to try it out.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
just sucks because it's kind of like I got all these speakers in there. I got like 2 dozen speakers in there, and I know the AV10 doesn't do that many. So I
Yeah, and
feel
I
like,
think, great technologies like both of them are is that there's always a limitation in performance of a loudspeaker, right?
yeah,
And you're asking more out of a woofer in both scenarios. But I don't think it's that different than standard bass management. When
yeah,
we have standard bass management and doing a really good calibration is hard. We the a lot of systems that we use have these auto calibrations. They, oh, I set up my little microphone. I measured 4 subwoofers, and auto calibration does some stuff, and now it's great, right?
yeah,
Well, most of the time, we're probably leaving a lot of performance on the table.
yeah,
And chasing a perfectly flat curve doesn't mean it sounds great.
yeah,
I've seen a lot of people, oh, I PQ'd this down 10 dB for these peaks, so it was equal with a null. Well, you just threw away 10 dB of
yeah.
performance.
Hmm.
And so chasing the perfect flat curve and I've heard perfectly flat curves, and sometimes you lose the impact, right? Because they're not summing in a perfect phase alignment. What a lot of my really high end calibrators do is, even with Trinoff, with Storm, doesn't really matter whether they come upon an AVR or whatever. they are matching phase with the subwoofers first.
Mhm.
So time and phase alignment. So what happens in that scenario then when you start adding the subwoofers in is you remove a lot of the limitations of what an algorithm in a processor is doing. It's taking that data, the amplitude and the phase measurements, it's making lots of assumptions in the background. We don't know what those assumptions are, right? It's base management being controlled by whatever processor. A lot of those assumptions may be just dead wrong, or maybe it was a poor measurement. It was noisy in the background. It was, very. There was lots of reflections and noise going on in the room from the walls rattling, etc.
Yeah.
And it's picking up that in the signal, and it starts making assumptions that maybe are incorrect or maybe not the greatest data. And then your base management is, trying to make up for a lot of problems, and maybe they're not real problems. And so that performance is, not necessarily great at that point in time. Taking like huge peaks and just PQing them down a little bit. I mean,
Mhm.
EQ actually improves decay, even though it's just plain old EQ, it does, and there are true sound quality benefits to taking down a resonance and some of that decay. So those decisions that the processor has to make are a lot less now. Therefore, the end result is a lot better. So those are some great techniques of
So, so are
doing.
you EQing before you do room correction, or would you room correction first, then EQ?
Yeah, so a lot of people ask me those questions of saying, "Hey, what should I do?" And I used to think, and that's how much we've learned over the last 5 years. I think even in the processing capabilities, but how much I've learned actually over about bass in a room and stuff like that is EQing first and doing the time and phase alignment
Yeah.
is a big improvement. And even if it's just EQ, EQ first. I used to say, let base management do it. It's probably doing a better job than you're going to. Um, there may be some situations if you're not very experienced where maybe that's true. But PEQing out some of those giant peaks.
Yeah.
Keep in mind, everyone, you cannot boost a null.
Yeah.
It's a perfect cancellation. You're just going to make your woofer drive move farther, create distortion. So don't do that. Um, But PQing the peaks down a little bit does also improve the end results in standard base management. Again, it's got fewer decisions to make of what sacrifices it's going to internally decide to sum a bunch of subwoofers together. So